Coming to you from Final Third Cigar and Whiskey Lounge in Ingalls, Indiana, Indiana's exclusive Aladino Cigar Lounge. It's the Final Third Podcast.
Welcome back to Final Third Podcast. I'm Rob.
I'm Isaiah. We got a couple special guests with us. We're live on location. Actually, not live, but we are on location.
We're live right now.
I am alive.
We are live.
Yeah. But we're over here at Spirits of French Lick with Alan Bishop.
Mm-hmm. What's up, guys?
And we got Justin over here. I don't know your last name.
Whaley.
Whaley.
There you go.
I knew I was going to forget that.
Could have made up anything right there.
Could have.
It's Dustin.
Dustin.
It's Dustin. Get it right.
Yeah. But we're over here today. Going to be talking about some of the things that they do because, well, we got a couple barrels coming in from them.
Absolutely.
And
we're
got
going
a
to be
couple
tasting through those two barrels today, too.
We are. Got a couple questions for you to answer eventually. We'll
Yeah.
get to that, though. But
Yeah, and honestly, the big thing for us is we just wanted to come down and get more people to know who you guys are, learn a little bit more about you. I mean, when I come down here and met you, what was that, early spring. Late winter, whatever it was, you know, I was just floored by the knowledge you were spewing out, and that just was on me showing up on a visit, you know? It wasn't even like really doing it seriously. It was just like, you're telling me all these stories. Like, damn, there's a lot of information here that I had no clue about. And I'm sure most of our guys will love that as well. So
Yeah, I'm all about it. It's always fun hanging out with you guys anyways. So we definitely had a good time last time you were here for the barrel pick. And
had a great time.
Tore up some barrels for sure.
we sure did. We sure did.
That was the tour day also.
Yeah. I went home and went to sleep.
Must have been nice.
It was nice.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't even make it home. I made Dad drive home, and I slept on the way home.
Yeah, because you live about half hour from here.
About an hour
from
Right.
here.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
He does too.
Yeah.
Do you
Hour
really?
the other direction.
Yeah, he's that way, I'm that way.
Oh, geez. Okay. All
Well,
right.
Give us a, super quick elevator pitch for Spirits of French Lick. What is it? What do you guys make? And why should people be interested?
So we are the largest pot still distillery in the state of Indiana. We've held that title since we got into the distilling industry in 2016. April 2016, we started distilling. I suspect that we'll maintain that title because everybody else is putting in column stills.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that, but we're playing into the history of distillation here in southern Indiana, specifically in a geographic region known as the Black Forest of southern Indiana, which is Washington, Orange, Lawrence, Crawford, Harrison, and Perry counties, where between 1858 and 1914, there were 155 plus legal operating distilleries making primarily apple brandy, which is why your picks are special to me. Apple brandy and absinthe in particular are my passions. Nonetheless, it's called Spirits of French Lick for a couple reasons. The main reason is because to us, we're paying tribute and homage to the history of southern Indiana. So it's not just the spirits in the bottle, it's the spirits of the place. That's why everything is named after a historic character from the Black Forest region. Lee Sinclair, Solomon Scott, Matty Gladden, or we name it after a location like the Morning Glory or Old Clifty Apple Brandy. Try to bring those stories back to the forefront and be able to tell those stories. And it's kind of a form of what we think of as like necromancy because, you know, if you tell a story about Lee Sinclair, nobody in New Orleans knew who Lee Sinclair was, despite how famous and how popular he was at one point in time, until we put a bottle of whiskey out. So we were able to kind of bring those characters back, pay tribute to them, etc. Our motto is respect the grain, and the idea behind that is that grain has terroir in the same way that grapes have terroir. So the land and everything around the land is influencing the character of the raw materials you're making the spirit out of. So we very much so want to put our emphasis on that. We focus on double pot still distillation for retention and concentration of flavor. We try to do more of a blend and balance. If you talk to a Kentucky guy, they're going to say 60-70% of their flavor profile is coming from the barrel. For us, it's more 50-50. We want 50% raw material fermentation and distillation, and then 50% maturation on top of it. And we don't want to lose that because that pot still character is very much so about representing what the raw material was when it was ripe in the field. So that's really kind of our focus overall. We sort of have 4 pillars. So bourbon, brandy, American whiskeys, which would be like rye whiskey, and then eventually single malt. We do have some single malt put back. And then botanical spirits, so things like gin, absinthe, aquavit, etc. But really, it's kind of a ready, fire, aim philosophy. So when you're a craft distiller, you have to be quick. You have to be nimble. You have to be fast on your toes and do things that big guys can't, even the mid-tier craft distillers can't really do. So you make a lot of stuff, you come up with a lot of stuff, and you kind of see what sticks to the wall, as it were. So
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think you and I have you way more than I have, but nerding out on absinthe, and I've used your absinthe since we've opened up for my Sazerac cocktail.
excellent.
And I love it on its own, sipping on it. So I'm super excited, to try your little.
Rob had never tried it before, and I had a bottle of the Absinthe Le Bleu.
Yeah, I had never tried yours before until that day. Yeah,
I think I had got it at a Total Wine or something like that.
Yep.
And brought it in because I knew Rob liked absinthe, and especially for his Sazeracs, which is, it's one of the defining characteristics of that cocktail. But using something like the Absinthe Le Bleu, it shines through just like you want it to. And actually, it's good to sip on.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely a very Americanized absinthe, a much lighter style of absinthe. We took the traditional Swiss Le Bleu from the Val de Traverse, and we lightened it a little bit, and we sweetened it a little bit because that's what we like here in Southern Indiana.
Yep.
And it's a good entry-level absinthe, and that's exactly what we're after. So.
Well, good deal.
Speaking of things to drink, what are we starting on? 'Cause
Yeah.
my glass is still dry.
I know mine is right. Sad.
All right, so these are the 2 barrel picks that you guys and Indiana Bourbon did the last time you were here. So I believe this one, the first one, I gotta take my glasses off so I can see what number is. Is there a number on there? Yeah, 1146.
1146, and it's a 5-year.
And that's a new oak barrel, right? That's what we did that one in. No, that was
Lee Sinclair.
those are
wasn't it?
reused Lee W. Sinclair barrels from the
Yeah.
very first batch of Lee. That's what it was. You were correct, and
Good
it is HAZMAT at 140.9 proof. So.
Oh yeah.
5 years old.
We know how to pick them.
Let's
Listen,
do it.
it won't fix it, but it'll probably make you forget about it for a little while.
It might. It might.
More than likely.
Well, I'm excited to get into
Nothing
this
wrong
again.
with that.
I'll let you guys
That's
pour so I
amazing.
don't knock anything over.
It's all good.
But yeah, so Justin, you want to tell the people here what you do around here? Or?
Cleans the bathroom.
Clean the bathroom and break everything.
Yeah. What did you break today?
Honestly,
Justin,
I don't
what did you
think
break today?
I don't think I broke anything today. I found some problems that needed fixed, but so I'm the assistant distiller here. I've been working here since last April.
Meant to say, sorry. What you meant to say was, I identified the things I broke yesterday that I didn't tell Alan that I broke.
He wasn't supposed to know that, but Jedi mind tricks and all. So I'm the assistant distiller here. I've been working here since last April. Alan likes to joke that I was kind of like a little orphan Justin showing up on the doorstep. Honestly, that's what it was. I tell everybody that I had done some charity boxing and done a distillery tour here the day after one of my fights, and started hanging out with Alan. I did a little bit of drone work and stuff like that for the people out front. Crashed my drone the first day here,
Oh, no.
actually. But started hanging out with Alan. Was coming in like once a week on my days off from my job that I had prior to this, and it turned into wanting to learn more about it, and they hired me on. For some reason, I still don't understand why, because there's a whole joke about one of the single barrels that went somewhere else, and I complained about it because it should have got released here first. And me and Alan go back and forth on it. Went to Texas, and it was a whole thing. But yeah, so I pretty much just learned from Alan, try to learn something every day. That's one of the things I believe very firmly is you never stop learning when it comes to anything in life. If you do, then you should be getting out of whatever you're doing.
Agree.
So that's my thing here, is just try to learn and take everything in.
To be fair, no one from Indiana was asking for weird single barrels, but people from Texas definitely were.
Well, I can't speak for everybody else in Indiana because it's Indiana.
Just a happy married couple.
Hey, there's this little cigar and whiskey lounge that'll be getting all kinds of weird stuff.
Well, it's changed now in the past couple of years,
Yeah.
thankfully. Indiana was a late adopter for us. Like, we caught on in other states way before we caught on in Indiana for some odd reason.
It's that self-hate thing you always talk about.
Yeah. Who's your self-hatred? Nothing good ever happens in Indiana, and nothing good could ever come from Indiana.
Yeah.
It's the people who are from Indiana with no background in Kentucky didn't even go to college in Kentucky, but they somehow have a Kentucky license plate or a UK Wildcats emblem on their vehicle, right? There's no limestone in Indiana. You can't make bourbon in Indiana.
Yeah.
The river's magic.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness! So
This is so
there is
good.
almost a toasted marshmallow sort of sweetness on the nose of this, and you can definitely smell a little bit of barrel spice. And on the palate, this is my first sip of whiskey for the day.
Me too.
Rob and I had a cigar on the way down here, but it was
There's a light one.
the Pice Anastasia, always a good morning cigar.
So I agree with you. There's a graham cracker note on this, and there's a caramel note on it, and it clearly comes from that Lee Sinclair barrel that this went into. So Lee Sinclair is our 60% corn, 17 wheat, 13 oat, and 10% caramel malt bourbon. And this was from like barrel 8 or 10.
Yeah,
It was
like one of the first barrels.
first couple batches of Lee Sinclair that we recycled from our 2-year-old. And then just so you guys know, so this is all apple brandy distilled from 100% Michigan fresh pressed apple juice using a South African brandy yeast called Vin 13 that I've been using the majority of my career.
And that barrel would have spent its entire life in the room that you all are in.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and I mentioned
You want to
that
talk
because-
real quick about this room for the people on the other side?
Yeah.
Like what goes on
Because I was
here,
real
what's
interested
stored
when
in
you
here?
told me
Yeah.
about that when I was here last time, Alan.
Yeah, so this is what we call our barrel shy or our barrel cellar. This is much more in common with like what you're going to see in cognac or in Normandy or Calvados style distillation. You'll also see something like this at Copper and Kings in their actual basement that they have. And the idea behind this, we have two different kinds of warehouses. So we have this warehouse connected directly to the distillery. Although it is not actively heated or actively cooled, it works off the passive heating and cooling of the building itself, essentially. So what it also does is it tends to hold a little higher humidity. Temperatures only fluctuate 30, 40 degrees throughout the year. So we get the full effect of all 4 seasons. When you're in an outside warehouse like our other 2 warehouses, which are much more like barrel barns or pole barns, when you get into cold weather, there's a certain point where nothing happens within that barrel. So within this room, we get the effect of all 4 seasons, but we also don't get crazy high temperatures, which drive off volatility or the aroma of the spirit itself. So about 90% of what you taste is actually what you're smelling. And with things like apple brandy, where it's so volatile anyways, and it's so kind of delicate, if you were to put this in a really hot warehouse, you would lose that apple aroma very quickly, and you wouldn't have a differentiating factor between this and, say, a bourbon, which in particular with the Hoosier style of apple brandy, the aroma is very, very important because as I'm sure you guys have noticed as you're drinking this, it drinks much more like a bourbon than any other apple brandy I think that's out there on the market.
Yeah, I agree.
It's very bourbon adjacent. We like to say that apple brandy is kind of bourbon's sexier older sister, as it were. So, and it's
You guys
very,
like your sisters down here?
Oh, of course, of course. Stepsisters don't count.
Oh, okay. I'll keep
Listen,
that in mind next time.
That's
I'm in
just
French
all a
Lake.
stepsister is a girlfriend that lives in your house.
Okay, so
It
I'm
took
gonna
all of
I'm
12
gonna
minutes
rabbit
to go
trail
south.
this right
That's-
now.
And I haven't even had a drink yet.
So Rob and I on the last show, somebody complained that we were getting a little bit too redneck because somehow we got on the topic of skinning squirrels and how to do
Hell
it
yeah.
best.
Up underneath the tail, get that strip, and you go around the back legs and all in one go.
Pull it off like some pants, man.
That's right.
Exactly.
Like a stocking.
But then Rob said, "Oh, we'll show them. We're about to have Alan Bishop
Yeah.
on the show."
Well,
Oh, yeah.
welcome to Hoosier Occupied Northern Kentucky.
Yeah.
That's what we call it. So if you think about it in a lot of ways, Indiana, it could kind of be divided into 2 states. There's southern Indiana, and then there's everything north of that.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with the rest of the state. But once you move past about Columbus, Indiana, culturally, things tend to change.
Yeah.
In southern Indiana, you have a lot more, let's say, old world sentimentality. In particular, you have a lot more in common with like eastern Kentucky and even northern Kentucky. So, you know, we call it Hoosier Occupied Northern Kentucky, essentially, as its own country. And if you abbreviate that, it spells the word honky. So,
That's great.
Well,
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. No, that's amazing.
yes,
This,
you ever eat turtle?
yes,
Love turtle.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're in good
No,
company.
I've all
We were
my
just talking
family's
about
from
some turtle
southern
soup the other
Indiana.
day, man.
My only problem with turtle soup is skinning the turtle.
Oh, it's a pain.
That's the I found that the easiest way to do it is to cut a slit in the back of the neck and stick your air compressor hose in there.
That's a new one on me. I hadn't heard that.
You've never seen someone do that?
No, I have not.
You can do that with
blows them
anything.
up like a balloon, and that's it separates the skin immediately. It's disgusting. But
I'm honestly surprised you've never seen that because, like, I've done it with a deer before. You're pretty much making like a Macy's blimp that never floats.
Right?
hey, Dr. Johnston, you're welcome.
Yes.
Like,
I have. I've seen the water hose trick.
okay.
Where you cut the turtle's head off and shove the water hose into the turtle, and then it blows up, and then you can peel the shell and everything off. But I've never seen the air hose trick. That's a new one on me. I'm gonna have to try that.
The water might clean a little bit better than just blowing it up and let it shatter everywhere. You get all that nasty shit coming out the other end.
It's just the it's wild.
I joked with my wife the last time because I didn't butcher any last year. I will this year. I'm gonna throw out a couple lines here in the swamp behind the building here in a couple days. That's how redneck we are here. We catch turtles at work.
Yeah. You got to keep the snappers under control.
But I had the year before last, I think I had 4 or 5, and it was just so hot I couldn't get them butchered. So we kept them in a trough in the yard, and it became like a daily ritual for me and my daughter to go feed them. And we kept these turtles for like 3 months, man.
Did they get names?
No, they didn't get names. But by the time that we butchered them, honestly, we spent so much money on hot dogs feeding these turtles. Like, it was just processed hot dog meat is all it was.
It tastes like a swamp dog.
Right. It's a swamp
Yeah.
dog.
So
I will say, back to the brandy here. This to me is like caramel apple cobbler.
the thing that stuck out for me on this one, especially on our pick day, was the amount of spice it has just to balance out that sweetness.
Yep.
It's still a distinctly sweet spirit, and it's not spicy. I'll get into some medicinal ryes that I absolutely love, but this is perfectly balanced, and I love that because you don't see that a lot in the brandy world. Any sort of barrel spice or anything like that.
Or when you do, and I don't mean this as a knock against them in any way, shape, or form because I have all the respect in the world for them. But when you do it, it'll be something like Laird's where it almost goes too far.
Yeah.
And there's no apple.
Yeah.
You know? And Laird's there are some of Laird's releases that do have that issue, in my opinion. But that's the beauty of this thing is you're trying to balance with our style of Hoosier apple brandy is you want to balance the apple aromatics, the baked apple flavor, and for me, there's a lot of like apple crisp in particular because those oats from the Lee Sinclair are still showing up in this from that used barrel,
They
and
really
it's
are.
just to me straight up apple crisp. But then you want the grace of it, but then you also want the power behind it, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to get a bourbon drinker to buy a couple bottles this year, it better be something that they can relate to. Right.
Yeah.
If I throw a Calvados in front of a bourbon drinker, they're gonna be like, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
You know, it's too light, it's too delicate, it's not got enough of anything. You know, this is something that feels like home, something that feels familiar. You know, it's kind of like a prettier version of your wife, I guess. Really, right?
So like your cousin.
Yeah, like your cousin wife. Step cousins don't count. Those are girlfriends that live with your uncle and aunt.
But
No,
this still does drink like a high proof bourbon.
It does.
But you'd think at 5 years, if there was a HAZMAT bourbon at 5 years, it would just be so hot that I think it'd be unbearable.
Yeah, you wouldn't
But
get
this
the sweetness
is
you're getting.
HAZMAT. This is super sweet, has a little bit of spice, but it's not the ethanol burn.
No.
This is why I was so excited about doing this pick is because, you know, we have, of course, Indiana, you have a lot of bourbon lovers now in Indiana that are chasing bourbon, but to introduce them to a different style that's going to still fit the portfolio that they like, and honestly, just open it up because I think once people try these, they're going to be hunting, you know, some higher proof brandies out there. And the only one other than this one that I enjoy, well, you like the La Encantada, which is not really a brandy, but it is.
Well,
ish.
but
the
some of them they finish in bourbon barrels, which turns it into a brandy.
Right.
Otherwise, it's
the
an
Copper and
Armagnac.
Kings, which I know Copper and Kings you were a part of. That's the one that we've had on our shelf since we opened up.
Yep.
And I think when people try this, they're going to realize what this stuff really does.
So getting into that, I'd like to talk about your start into distillation. Everything that you're willing to talk about.
Are we allowed to cuss on this show?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, 'cause
Nobody cares.
Because I've been holding back because I didn't know.
No,
if I could or
go
not,
for
so.
it. This is extremely
Just don't-
casual.
Just don't say
Gotcha.
fuck.
Don't say fuck.
Yeah.
Fuck damn.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just go straight
anything
George
you want,
Carlin.
anything you want.
So, yeah,
exactly.
I'd like
to go there.
So
our people would like to hear about your entrance into distilling, and there's a lot of heritage even from the side that wasn't particularly legal in your family lineage. And if you're comfortable with it, talk about that too.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's interesting you guys mentioned the Copper and Kings thing because there is some there's some DNA in this that is similar to the Copper and Kings aesthetic, right? Now, I probably took this a little further as far as like pushing the boundaries more towards bourbon even than Copper and Kings does. But I had to do that because otherwise you're just repeating yourself, right?
Right.
And I did work there for a couple of years. The Apple Brandy program was partially mine, partially Brandon O'Daniel's. It was the only thing that we fermented from the get-go ourselves. As you guys probably know, they bought in low wines from different distilleries and redistilled those for the great brandy, etc. So used to joke with them that they should market themselves as craft rectifiers instead of craft distillers because no one would complain. You're just being honest. So
Yeah.
just somehow craft rectifier doesn't sound quite as sexy as craft distiller. Nonetheless, so my background, I come from a family of distillers. Really both sides of my family, on my mom's side and my dad's side. My family are all from Kentucky, mostly eastern Kentucky, around the Oneida, Manchester area, down in Clay County on my mom's side, and on my dad's side around Greensburg, Hodgensville, Greene County, Hart County, etc. on my dad's side. So my grandparents on dad's side, they came up here in the 40s and bought a farm in Pekin, Indiana, and started raising tobacco, and my grandpa made moonshine on the side. And so I grew up doing that. I grew up around stills, etc. So when I was like 3 or 4 years old, I remember seeing stills, being around them. I didn't think anything odd about it because to me, it was just another piece of farm equipment. It was another reason why we couldn't go do things as a family on the weekend other than actually distilling. And what we were doing is we were making enough money to be able to pay property taxes and then to pay for Christmas. Or if somebody needed some help in some way, shape, or form, if somebody was running short on money, we had some money that we could give them. We could help them out however we could. On the Bishop side, I don't know how deep those distillation routes go. I've never been able to prove anything, one shape, form, or the other, but I suspect that my great-grandfather at least was distilling because there's some things that have led me in the direction of believing that. On the Wilson side, the Bargers in particular, on my mom's side, they actually moved up here from Clay County, Kentucky in the take it back, probably 1960s is when they moved up here. And they moved up here because my great-grandfather was a massive distiller and bootlegger in Clay County, Kentucky, an area around Jacks Creek. And more or less, he'd had enough run-ins with the sheriff that at one point in time, the sheriff came to his house and he said, the next time we come out here, one of us isn't leaving the situation alive. And so they ran him out of Kentucky. They ended up here around Salem, Indiana, where he built chicken barns as his cover and use those as his still houses, basically. So I got kind of tangentially interested in distilling when I was around 15 years old for the obvious reasons. And I'm not sort of trying to justify that in any way, shape, or form, but mom and dad knew growing up in a rural community I was going to find stuff. So if I was going to do anything, it had to happen at home where they could keep an eye on me. And dad and grandpa basically helped me build a little 10-gallon pot still out of an antique stainless steel coffee dispenser from Fort Knox, Kentucky. It literally took like a whole bag of flour dough to seal this thing up. It looked like you were baking a cake every time you fucking ran it. And then they gave me 2 rules, and the 2 rules were don't blow your ass up in the backyard when you're distilling, and bring us something when it's worth drinking. But then they refused to tell me how to do anything. Now I knew the things I'd seen them do when I was growing up. They did a lot of sugar shine, which is basically 1 pound per gallon of sugar, 1 pound per gallon of grain, and we did a lot of fruit brandies, which was usually 2 pounds per gallon of fruit, 1 pound per gallon of sugar. And really, the only reason they did fruit brandies because everybody around southern Indiana's got a fruit tree in their yard and they don't use it for anything, but they also want to mow around it. It's a great way to get stung by every insect in the state of Indiana.
Yes.
You get to know them very well.
Yeah.
So brandy's always been kind of part of my life. And then in my late 20s, I'd converted the old tobacco farm into an organic produce farm, really focusing on plant breeding, trying to come up with open pollinated varieties for sustainable farming in southern Indiana. There's no money in that whatsoever at all. I don't know how I ever thought that there would be any money in it. So that led me into thinking, well, if you can't sell this stuff, what happens when you run it through a still? Distilling, people forget this, is inherently agricultural. That's why Indiana was a distilling state, just like Illinois was a distilling state. Ohio, Pennsylvania, it's all related to the agriculture and what you have on hand at that place. So by the time I was in my late 20s, I had a 150-gallon pot still that was made out of an old milk stirrator tank, literally setting out in the open in my parents' backyard. My now wife was basically like, you got to go find a job doing this or I'm out. You know, we'd go to parties and stuff, and jars would come back around to me at parties from people that I didn't know, and they knew that I distilled it. And this was at the same time that, you know, moonshiners and all that stuff was kind of getting popular. So people come up and ask for an autograph on a mason jar. I'd be like, I don't know who the fuck you are or how you even know where this came from, right?
Autographing mason jar.
Man, it was a whole thing. But I used to joke around about it too, because, you know, the old saying is you got to know a guy that knows a guy. So I made these business cards that said that. And then I had the greatest cell phone number of all time. So it was the last digits were 7115. So you could advertise and say things like, it's like a 7-Eleven with 5 items. That's how you memorize it, right?
Nice.
And then I was working at the, I don't think I ever told this part on a podcast before, but I'll tell it now. At that time, I was working at a gas station in Pekin. And if you ever want to know anything that's going on in like a small town, go work at the gas station. And I'm not talking about like the nice gas station. Find the one that's questionable, that's highly suspect.
You're scared to go to, but
Yes.
you need to go to.
Could
Right.
be a laundering front.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you will learn everyone's business real quick. And you'll also learn who can help you move the things that you have. You can also tell every time that it's harvest day during marijuana season, because suddenly everyone smells like weed walking in. So, I did a lot of bootlegging in that situation. So eventually my wife was like, you got to go get a job doing this. And at the time, Indiana hadn't opened up their distilling laws to allow for craft distilling. They were talking about it, but there was a certain state legislator that didn't want anything to do with it. He actually called it the Still on Every Hill bill. And he had made it such that the way the regs read, you had to either have your winery or your brewery license for 3 years and have it active. In order to even be considered for a craft distilling permit or an artisan distilling permit. And his argument was that basically these people who own craft wineries or craft breweries have shown they're responsible with alcohol. And my argument back to him, because at the time I had some investors, was what you're really saying is that it's okay to sell everyone else's alcohol, just don't sell your own, because I can go buy a liquor store right now and I don't have to have any experience.
Yeah.
Of course, he didn't like that very much. So I started putting in applications in Louisville, Kentucky. Every time I saw a craft distillery opening up, I put in an application. Made the world's worst resume that you've ever seen. It literally like talked about, home distilling and all of that stuff, because I didn't have anything, I didn't know anybody in the industry other than I knew Steve Beam and Lisa Wicker. They both helped me very, very much so to get into the industry. But I didn't have anybody where I could be like, oh, I spent, 3 years working under Jimmy Russell because he knows, my dad's cousin or something, So they were literally the worst resumes that you've ever seen in your life.
My middle name might be Beam.
Right. Could be. That was the first thing I was always put on something was like knows Steve Beam from Limestone Branch, right? Because the name Beam, underlined it twice and circled it.
Yeah.
So, Copper and Kings hired me, probably not because I was the best distiller for the job, but because I was certainly the cheapest distiller for the job. It really, honestly, I love the idea of being a brandy distiller, especially in bourbon country, and kind of being up against the wall with that stuff and trying to change people's minds on what brandy is. Because at the time, brandy was considered, cheap and sweetened and not good. And we were the exact opposite of that. So I love that mentality, but I didn't care much for the ownership. And honestly, nothing wrong with Louisville. I don't want to work there and I don't want to live there. Right. I needed to get back over here on this side of the river.
Yeah.
I knew that distilling history and I wanted to lean into it as hard as what I could. So I was there at Copper and Kings for about 2 years and was looking for a job when the Doties found me through Lisa Wicker and Ted Huber and a couple other people and called me. And I was driving back from somewhere in Eastern Kentucky from picking up grapes for Copper and Kings. And when they called, I think I said yes to the job before they even told me how much they were going to pay me or anything. I was like, fuck this. I got to get out of here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I couldn't deal with it. There was a certain mentality about Copper and Kings, and especially the ownership at the time. And this is nothing that's a secret to anybody who knows me or has heard me talk, but I could not deal with them. And I had to get the fuck out of there because I was going to lose it on them. So it came at the exact right time, and that was in November of 2015. So just shortly after my daughter was born, as it were. So it was I was very thankful to get that job.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's quite the story too.
It's a
Going
long
from
story.
working at a gas station to being
Yeah.
a distiller.
Yeah.
And,
Selling produce
all
at
of
the
the
farmer's
things.
market
Yeah.
and the gas station. Also figured out if you want to make money at the farmer's market, you just had to figure out how to bootleg moonshine out of the back of your truck. Because you get to know everybody in a small town. You're like, I know that guy drinks.
This is clarified tomato juice.
That's
Yes. Yes.
So, Justin, what were you doing before you were here?
My story is not as romantic, and
This is more ambitious, though.
it is more ambitious. So I was a paramedic and a firefighter. I'd worked in EMS since 2008. That's actually how my wife and I met. We'd worked together since we known each other. We met in 2013. And I had got on the fire department in 2017. That was my dream job. That's what I wanted to do. I had worked towards that since 2007 when I got out of high school. That's what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, in Indiana, there are very few career fire departments. So I had done some volunteer work while working in EMS. I worked multiple EMS jobs at the same time. That's kind of the way EMS is, unfortunately. It's finally catching up to decent pay, but when I first started, like, I was literally making $6 or whatever minimum wage was plus 10 cents pretty much.
Goodness.
To be a non-driving EMT, which is somebody that wasn't old enough to drive, but I could be in the back with the people. And so that's where I started out at. I worked my way up from an EMT to what's called, it's not even a certification anymore, an intermediate EMT, to where you could push some drugs, do some cardiology stuff, and some more fun things, as I like to say. Got my paramedic. I still hold my paramedic license, and I will hold on to that probably until they won't let me anymore, just because it's something that's special to me, something that I worked really hard to keep. But anyway, got on the fire department in 2017. I really, really enjoyed working at the fire department. I have nothing bad to say about any of the guys there, or the chief, or the department in and of
So
itself.
you're doing better than me already. Already talked shit about the former owners of Copper
No,
Kings.
I do. I loved the fire department, but going into it, I was expecting one thing, and it was a totally different thing. Plus, working through COVID, I will 100% say broke me. I will throw that out there. EMS-wise, it was a bitch. Working through COVID, just dealing with all of that. But then the fire department side was kind of completely opposite. Like, we went to a standstill on going on medical runs, stuff like that, because we were trying to stay safe, make sure that we could go out, put out fires and stuff we needed to do. And it drove me insane. Like 100% sitting at station 24 hours a day, 3 days a week sucked. But anyhow, like I said earlier, I went into I started doing some charity boxing. It's called Guns and Hoses in Evansville. If you've never been, I highly suggest you go. I don't know if I will fight again next year. I really, really want to. I just don't know if I'm going to have time to put it in the training for it and stuff. But I won my first 2 fights, lost my last fight that I was in. I blame Alan because he told half of the building. Have y'all ever been to the Ford Center in Evansville?
No.
Well, half of it was full of cops, and Alan told them to suck it.
Casually,
because
as you do.
Yeah, because Alan walked out with me, and he was dressed up as Duthy Rhodes, if anybody is familiar. If not, then I highly suggest you do a deep search and figure that out. But walks out and tells them to suck it.
You told me to walk out with you. You didn't say that I couldn't tell the cops to tell you to suck it.
I think with a guy like Alan, you just need to give him a little bit more parameters.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
have to
But
be
then
very specific.
I proceeded to get my ass beat by a man that looked like a keg with abs.
He did look like Brock Lesnar a little bit.
But anyhow, long story short, like I said, I came in here and started hanging out with Alan. I've always had like a weird wanting to learn things. I've got a little bit of family history, not as much as Alan does. My uncle down south, who is no longer with us, he ran Shine, and I always wanted to kind of learn that because I always heard the stories from him and family and things like that. I had gotten the chance to run a still with a good friend of mine down in Atlanta. That was my first time running still. Alan's actually tried some of that. I don't even know if I have any of that left. If I do,
Yeah, he told me it was terrible. Worst
it
stuff he
probably
ever had.
was.
You didn't get hired off your liquid resume.
Hey, no shit. I took like 10 gallons of mead and drove it to Atlanta to run it on a still. So it is what it is. But I've always had this thing that I wanted to not only learn distillation, but you mentioned a Sazerac earlier. I'm one of those people that it doesn't have to be served neat. Like, I love seeing what stuff does in cocktails. I love seeing what stuff does with food, with cigars. I love seeing how stuff is built from the ground up, and to me, that's the grain that goes into stuff or the fruit, the fermentation process, the things that you can do in that fermentation process to stress that yeast out to make it do some weird, funky things. Then after the distillation process is done, because as I tell people on the tour, like the distillation process is the one thing that you really can't control, because the still is going to do what it's going to do. And then after that, the maturation process, what the barrels are going to do based on where they're at, where they're made, the seasons that it goes through. It just, all that stuff amazes me.
Don't worry about your shirt there. We show titties on here.
Yeah, my titty popped out all of its own.
Yeah.
Your titty was all the way out?
Not quite.
He's a busty guy. What are you going to do?
Let's take a moment to hear from our partners. Is your closet starting to feel a little weak? You know, like shoddy fabrics, misshaped, tired designs? Then 7 Strong brand has exactly what you need to reinforce your look. We're talking a 4-way stretch of polyester, cotton blend, silky smooth, breathable, and above all, true to fit while keeping its fit. No? But what about our hidden collar button with reinforced stretching? It's pretty strong. Or how about designs that'll get you a standing ovation no matter the occasion? Happy hours to baby showers, the flight to date night, even from the shore to stepping out to the store. 7 Strong brand has button-down shirts that will transition you from one place to the next and make you stand out every single time. And for listening to our show, new customers get $5 off their first purchase with code FINAL3rd. Not to mention, all orders over $50 qualify for free shipping. And you know, just like any label on a bottle or cigar, these shirts are going to be a stamp of quality every time you wear them. So find your strength and style by checking out 7-strong.com, as well as following 7 Strong brand on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Our wonderful new table is brought to you by Deadwood Live. That's D-E-D Wood Live. Go check them out on Facebook and see what Derek can do for you. From bars to tabletops to a giant podcast table, they specialize in making super high quality furniture from live edge woods and reused barrels. So reach out to them on Facebook and see what they can do for you.
The funny thing about Justin was he mentioned the thing about the single barrel that went to Texas. So
Yeah.
He was on TikTok, and he had a TikTok account, and he had a following on there, and it was a different following than what I normally have. And I came to find out about him because we sent a barrel of what we call the Lost River bourbon down to Texas to Liquor King, who we do a lot of business with. We have a huge following down there around Dallas-Fort Worth area. And they were the first place to get this barrel. Well, we named it after the river here outside of town, Lost River. And it had a nice label on it, you know, the illustration, everything that our artist does. Had the story to go along with it. And so I hear through the grapevine from somebody up in the front office, like, this guy came in and he was like super pissed that there wasn't a Lost River available here and that it was in Texas and it should be in Indiana first and it shouldn't be in Texas. And then somebody sent me the video where he was talking about it. And I'd never met Justin. I walked back up front and I'm like, fuck this guy. We're never releasing Lost River in Indiana ever.
Hey.
It's going to Texas
Just
only.
because
from
of
now
him.
on.
Yeah.
Did I get a bottle?
You did get a bottle.
I got a bottle from
But that's
Texas.
and that's the point. And that's the fun of it. You got to drop weird stuff in weird places and see
I agree.
who goes to find
100%,
it. Right.
yeah.
So we're getting ready to drop weird stuff in Canada here shortly, just to see who will drive up there and go get it. But long and short of it is,
I'm not going to Canada.
Justin comes in. It's the Rush part of Canada. It's the Rush province, not the Nickelback province. So it's okay. So Justin comes in and he does a tour, him and Tiff, and we do a tour and he starts, messaging, hey, sometime can I come hang out for a day? I'm like, yeah, sure. You can come hang out, whatever. So he just starts showing up like 1 or 2 days a week, right? This goes on for months and he's doing work. Like he goes, can I do anything? And I'm like, you can go do this, 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 and this. And one day the owners are like, so are we going to hire this guy or... And I'm like, I don't know. He's working for free right now. I don't see the fucking problem. He's just happy to be here.
Right? I needed something to do on my days off.
Yeah. So we just poured the next barrel.
Yeah.
Did we ever figure out what type of red wine this was?
I did figure this out.
Okay.
So what this is, I don't know if you guys are familiar or not, but the very first thing that we ever did that really kind of caught on after the Lee Sinclair 2-year-old, the first real single barrels we did, and it was a single barrel because we ended up mingling 2 barrels is what we did. This is the second of those barrels, but it was unpretentious, which was a rye whiskey finished in a port cask.
Oh.
This was a port cask that then had 2-year-old rye whiskey put into it, and that's what characteristics that we're pulling off of this is that port and that rye.
Wow.
characteristic.
Okay.
It definitely has the port characteristics
Yeah.
in it.
It took him pulling the barrels out and having them in the H3 room for me to look at them and then like trigger that memory. Oh, I know exactly what that is. And the funny thing is, so unpretentious was for anybody that's followed us, that was like the first one that sort of like caught on in the underground, and it was very much so because I made a joke about it because everybody was doing port barrel, and I typically am not huge on doing port barrel finishes. So our sales guy had this place in Indianapolis that wanted a port barrel finish because he ran out of, I think they were doing a Jefferson's port barrel finish of some kind and they couldn't get it anymore. And so we did this barrel. I did it begrudgingly. I was like, don't ask me to do it again, Sean. It's not going anywhere else. Well, then COVID hit. Or it was right before COVID, and the guy backed out of buying the barrel. So we released it, and when we released it, I started making all these social media posts about how there were only so many bottles of it. And then I was joking, and I was saying, it's already selling on the secondary market for $500 a bottle. And then I'd wait a couple hours, and I'd post something else. I'd be like, it's now going for like $750 a bottle. Well, people started falling for it.
You created the market.
Yes, and then we started getting phone calls, and people would come out front at the time to come get a tasting of it, and they were literally saying, well, I heard this was $50 a pour. I mean, it turned into a thing like that. There's still a few bottles floating around. You'll see it every once in a while in the secondary for a couple $100s, and I was like, it was all a joke. Because I fucking hated the idea of doing a port finished thing because everyone else does it. But it turned into a thing, and
That tells you, man, marketing sells.
Yeah.
You know what else
Big
sells?
time.
I hope that one day on secondary I see one of them bottles for a couple $1,000s because as long as I'm involved, there'll never be another port barrel finish anything in this distillery. So
That's wild. Well, and what got me started on your brandy was the
Tequila barrel finish.
no, not the tequila barrel. That's one I tried here with him. It was the Isla Scotch barrel.
Yeah.
It's so
Smoked
good.
apple.
it is super
Oh
good.
my
Oh,
gosh.
it was, and actually, you guys were gracious enough, or I shouldn't say you guys suck. The girls up front were gracious enough to find a bottle when I was here last time that she sold it to me. It was like one of the last 2 that were on the winery side's desk. I bought that one. Now that's one of those bottles that as soon as I got back, I cracked it because I'm like, you got to drink that.
Oh yeah.
There's no sitting that one for secondary.
I killed a bottle of that, and it was almost a hazmat. It was 130 something.
Yeah, it's
137.9.
137.7
Yeah.
Or 7.
Yeah, 37.7.
I almost killed a bottle of that in 2 days back in January, and it about killed me.
I bet.
I remember sitting in the H3 room and being like, it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I was like, I can't do this.
Which speaking of proof,
Yeah.
147.9.
Yep.
Yeah.
As far as I know,
Oh my gosh.
we are the only distillery really doing hazmat apple brandies. And
You're the only one I've seen.
I've never seen it.
It started on accident. We had the NES group. If you guys aren't familiar with them, they do all like crazy wax and like bottle toppers and stuff. They came in here and they wanted to do an apple brandy barrel, and they pulled a tequila, an apple brandy and matured in tequila barrel down, and that's what they wanted. But they only wanted half of it. And I was like, well, we gotta sell the other half. Well, they wanted a hazmat, and I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking I got to bottle all this at one time. I'm like, we'll never sell a hazmat apple brandy, especially not one that was completely matured in a tequila barrel. And I'll be damned though if it didn't sell out that weekend. Our half of it was gone. And I was like, well, I guess people like hazmat apple brandy. And now
I actually remember you talking about that one on an Instagram live, and I was like, I'm intrigued enough to think about going down there. I never did.
Well, we kind of talked about it after the pick and during the pick. You know, the reason we picked these two was because we felt like these were 2 totally unique, totally different brandies. But they're also easy ones, I think, that we can pull people into to try them. If we were to pull the tequila one, now we've got tequila and brandy, 2 different things that are very polarizing in some circles. And like after they try these, I definitely want to get one of your tequila barrels because that's special.
This one, the interesting thing for me on this
They're
one,
all
I
special.
don't know if you guys catch it on the front of it. So this one has got sort of our signature house note that a lot of our bourbons have, which is that eucalyptus or sort of horehound candy sort of note.
Oh yeah.
And then it also has a little bit of that red wine, but there's a lot of that Solomon Scott rye whiskey character setting on this.
I think that's what was throwing me off. It's the rye in port, where I was thinking like a dry red, like a cab, because it gives you that kind of drying feeling on your tongue a little bit.
The
But
other
it makes sense
thing-
with the rye and the port together.
The other thing I'm getting on this is like a really, really dark chocolate note.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like that. If it were a legitimate chocolate bar, it'd be bitter.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
that
dark
same
chocolate.
sort of fruity characteristic
Like a
from
70,
that. Yeah.
70%. Yeah. I'm curious too if you guys pick this up, and I'm really curious with Justin because I know he doesn't. This is not normally his speed, and our Solomon Scott has it, and I love it for it. So I love herbal and I love floral. This has got some of that floral lavender and stuff on the palates.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like at the peak though.
Yep.
Like
yep.
you get it and it's gone.
And I think the tannin even that was left over from that red wine, I think kind of makes it a little more subdued, and it sort of blends everything together. This one drinks maybe a little more aggressively than the other one. Of course, it's a little higher proof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't drink like it's 147 or
And this one is also, so this is 4 years and 4 months, where that one is 5 years.
5 year. Yeah.
So you got a little bit more time in the barrel. I will say, and I know how you feel about port barrel finish stuff. This is one of the few things that I would say would hold up to a port barrel and not be overshadowed by the port.
Yep.
So like that high proof plus a little bit of astringency, or as you say, phenolic stuff from the apple, kind of cuts through that port, and it turns into, to me, like a plum skin is a little bitter, and a little drying. That, or next to the actual pith or the seed of the plum, I get that from that port, but it's also sweet, which is port leaning also, but it's not sickeningly sweet.
So now realizing the age difference, I didn't think about this a while ago. There is another difference in these, and I told you guys wrong on the yeast on the first one. So this is straight up EC 1118, or what they call Predal de Mousse, which is the most common brandy yeast used on the face of the planet, most common wine yeast used on the face of the planet too. And this is Vin 13. And that's probably where some of those overall aromatic differences are coming from as well, is that difference in yeast. That's real geeky distilling shit there.
Oh yeah.
So
Now it's funny to me now hearing that it is like an old rye barrel. Just the fact that these two I loved because of the balance and because of the spice in there.
I saw your brain tick over when he said rye, because he is a medicinal rye lover,
right.
yeah.
But rye period he loves. So when
Somebody
I saw
has
you
to.
say that, I saw him going, "Oh hell yeah!" Let's
Well,
go.
no, it just makes sense as to why I liked it so much.
Yeah,
but
it
we
does.
tried this on the pick day with some chocolates that you guys had on
that
the
was
table,
perfect.
Yeah.
and that was just a wonderful pairing, which tells me it's a fantastic pairing for a really dark cigar.
I will say also for dark cigars, but also for someone that likes, wine, but
Yeah.
also doesn't mind higher proof whiskey. I think they'll love this because it's going to give you a little bit of both going there.
Also, I think people who are really into cigars with a lot of mouthfeel, really a creamy
Yes.
cigar, both of these being pot still, they're super oily. I don't know if you guys
Super
have noticed
oily,
that.
yeah.
I mean, they're
Yeah,
just
I just
completely
hangs on the
coating.
glass.
And the other interesting thing about it is thinking of the fruit notes. So in the first one that we tried, it's much more that apple crisp thing. This is stewed apple. This is maybe even like a little fried apple sort of characteristic. So
Yeah, I can see
Yeah,
that for
totally.
sure.
See
Fried
that.
apple with like a raspberry jam or something like that.
But
on
the
top
cool
of it.
thing is, like you were saying, the apple is still shining through.
right.
Yeah.
You never lose the apple, and I'm with you. It's like just like some of those hard ciders where they just keep on going with it too long, and it just loses all of its apple flavor. It's just a dry white wine.
Well, and even on the second one, even though it was that rye barrel and that port, the funny thing is, I think that this would be one that you could put this in front of a single malt drinker if there was somebody that liked the lowland stuff, like the Cardews that have a little of that green apple character. If you blinded them, they'd probably have a hard time figuring out that this was just straight up apple brandy versus thinking it was some kind of crazy high proof Cardew or something of that nature.
Totally.
I think honestly, either one of these. Now that we're in the world of finishing and stuff like that too, I think either one of these, you throw these in front of a bourbon lover and don't tell them it's brandy.
Yeah.
unless they can pull that apple note out and think of what it is, they'll never know.
Well, I don't think there's a lot of high proof bourbon drinkers that have ever had a
High-proof
brandy that's. I don't mean this in a bad way, but neither of these are pretty brandies.
No.
These are kind of hit you upside the head. Here's a ton of flavor. Here's a beautiful viscosity. Like it's like melted butter on the palate, which is one of my favorite things to find when I'm on a barrel pick. It's just that super thick, creamy mouthfeel. These are definitely
right.
And that's definitely something that we have talked about, and I know I've talked with Dirk about, is like we want to get people educated on this kind of brandy, because most people think of brandy, they think of that nasty E&J shit that's on the shelf.
Yeah.
Sweet,
What,
and
50
cheap,
proof
nastiness.
and super sweet and
Yeah.
gross. Like people think of brandy as like this super sweet, low proof, get the job done thing.
Yeah.
This is stuff you can get a bottle of it and enjoy it for a very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm excited to get people excited
That being
about it.
said, he said enjoy for a really long time, but one bottle of yours that I've enjoyed for a really short period of time is the
Clifty.
the Clifty aged in the
Stout
stout beer
barrels.
barrels.
Oh, yeah.
Dude,
I have taken
Well,
that bottle down so quickly.
we are still touting the day that we were here with the barrel pick team, because that barrel was completely full and there was one bottle left when our group left.
Right.
Is there any in the gift shop right now?
I don't.
Yeah, I think we have some. Yeah, I think we have a few left up
You guys
there.
are closed today, though, weren't you?
Justin can run a cash register.
Hell yeah,
if you know how to run a cash
Hell
register,
yeah.
As long as you're paying with a card, we can get that figured out.
Oh, we
All
can
right.
do that.
That one was a fun one for us because those stout barrels that we got in, they were full of banana ester, which is not uncommon in stout, but it was uncommon in how bright that banana ester was. It was literally as though, you're dealing with like bananas that had gone just the extra day, where you either had to, do something with them or throw them out. And I didn't know honestly if that was going to work with the apple brandy or not, and Justin didn't either. And it just so happened to work out okay.
Yeah,
strangely
it worked
enough.
out fantastic.
Yeah, I was excited about that one. And actually, before you all leave, I've got something for y'all to try, because we just released the Morning Glory in a stout
That we
barrel.
did the stout, same
Oh,
stout.
cool.
Yeah.
Filled the same day, but we released them at different times.
Yeah, and
That's
the Morning
awesome.
Glory's already got that kind of peanut butter and chocolate thing to it anyways.
Oh, wow.
The other thing I'll mention to you
Morning
guys-
Glory is your favorite of the
I
bourbons that you
fucking
make.
hate Morning Glory.
I'm glad you remember that and I didn't have to say it.
I don't, nope.
So,
I
okay.
don't drink it. I don't want it. Matter of fact,
What's the reason?
Do you like the stout finish version of it though?
I like the stout barrel finish
Okay.
version better than I do the original one. The reason I don't like it is first of all, so I'm biased because it wasn't my idea. So there's part of it. The original owner, John Doty, he had a couple of ideas, and buckwheat was one of them. And let me tell you, buckwheat straight up in a bourbon does not work at all. It's
Yeah, you
terrible.
were telling us that last time we were here.
So we figured out you have to toast it. You have to make kasha. And ironically, I do like the flavor of kasha. I like it raw. But when we distill this stuff, and it doesn't matter if we're distilling it now or we were distilling it when we first started 7 years ago, I don't like the flavor of it off the still at all. And I can't put my finger on what it is off the still that I don't like. But once it hits the barrel, the first 3 years to me, I'm just completely honest about all our products, it's trash the first 3 years. Somewhere around year 3.5, it becomes good trash. And what I mean by that is, for me, I know why people like it. I get why people like it. It has a little bit of a peanut butter and chocolate thing, but it's very much so Reese's Pieces. And I remember being a kid, and I remember being sick. I was like 5 years old. My mom had taken me to the doctor. I had a stomach bug or something. And for whatever reason, she gave me Reese's Pieces, and I threw them up all over the back of that fucking car. And every time I taste the Morning Glory,
Makes perfect sense.
it just comes back to me. And so the bad thing is, like, when we do barrel picks with Morning Glory, I'm like, don't ask me for tasting notes because I don't have anything good to say about
Vomit. All I taste
Right.
are
vomit, doctor's appointments.
this.
Yeah.
You're trying. If you're going to be a bourbon distiller in Southern Indiana, you're in bourbon's backyard, right? You're trying to get the attention of the bourbon drinkers, etc. Nothing we ever got the attention of like the traditional bourbon drinkers because it's so off kilter. Now we got like Fred Minnick loved Lee Sinclair, loved William Dalton, etc. And so I thought, well, we'll put out, we had like 11 barrels of Morning Glory year one. We'll put that out. We won't do it. It won't sell at all. The fucking traditional bourbon drinkers wanted that. They went for that over everything else. And now even Fred Minnick, I was talking to him on the phone the other day. He goes, man, that Morning Glory, he goes, I absolutely love it. It's funny because when he first tried it, I'll never forget this. I can't remember who he was on with, but he had a celebrity on and they were tasting through it. And he gets to the Morning Glory and he pours it and he tastes it and he goes, well, that's the least bad buckwheat bourbon I've ever had. And I was like, well, I'll take that shit.
What a compliment.
That's
Thanks,
awesome.
Fred.
But now he loves it. So, but good for him. More for everybody else because I ain't going to drink it.
We had a couple questions come in to ask you and you as well, if you want to weigh in on it. But one of our regulars commented on the frequency and the amount of bourbon that's being produced across the board. Do you guys think that there's just going to be a surplus in a couple years? Like, basically the question is the bourbon boom dying? And do you think they're producing way too much currently? And maybe that could even be a sustainability question on the other end of that.
Yeah. And well, it's kind of a historical question too, because this has happened before. It happened before Prohibition, when everybody got way too big. And when they got way too big, what happened was, and this wasn't just with bourbon, but with other spirits too, you had the whiskey trust move in and they would either put everyone else out of business by selling everything way cheaper than what anybody else could, or they would offer you money for your business and it would be bottom dollar. And if you didn't take it, that's fine. They'll just put you out of business anyways.
Right.
I do think we're headed the same direction. Everybody has this sort of optimistic view of the bourbon bubble will never pop. It absolutely will. And here's why it will pop. I feel like identified why it will pop. Everyone's getting way too big. And they're getting way too big because they're counting on foreign markets to open up. Specifically, they're counting on Japan. They're counting on China. They're counting on all of those foreign markets, even Russia up until recently, right? The problem with all those countries is they don't have replacement population.
Right.
No matter what you're selling to them right now, population is going to continue to diminish over the next 10, 20 years. When that market is not there for all this extra shit that you've made, you're going to dump it on the domestic market and you're going to sell it for whatever you can possibly sell it for.
Right.
They'll sink every craft distillery in the United States that is focused on bourbon if they want to, because they can, because they have the volume to do it. And whoever they is, the owners, etc., the multinationals, don't care because there's always whatever the next boat is. I would be very cautious right now if I was brand new coming into this industry and starting a craft distillery. I would not be focused on bourbon at all. I think we lucked out. It was already crowded when we came in with Spirits of French Lick, but we were so off kilter, we could get away with it. Now the boundaries have been pushed far enough within the bourbon landscape as far as what's out there and what's good. There's other craft distillers making really great stuff out there. I don't know, A, how you break into the market, B, once you break into the market, how do you keep a drinker, and C, if you break into the market and keep that drinker, if everything else goes to shit and they start dumping bourbon for nothing, and they will, it'll happen eventually, what do? You better be making some very differentiated spirits. And differentiated, I don't mean, bourbon's a spectrum and it's about this wide. There's only so much room to play around within that spectrum to get those different flavors and get the attention. I think that the days of being a mid-level distiller are over, or they will be soon. You're either going to be a great big huge distillery and maybe you make it through the bourbon bubble because you have other stuff, or you're going to be a little bitty small regional distillery that can do a little bit of everything. But anybody going into this right now, wanting to go into that mid-level where we are, 15, 20 states, maybe even Canada, you're just asking to turn this thing over to the bank in 7 or 8 years is what you're asking for. So
I kind of look at it like going into a liquor store, not like Walmart, anything like that, but a decent sized liquor store. Look at the bourbon aisle, right? It's saturated. There's no way around it. So kind of like Alan said, you're either gonna have to grow, get huge, or stay very regionally small. I would love to see somewhere do like just straight single barrels, and I think that keeps somebody afloat. But like the market is so saturated to where, like Alan said, it's gonna pop eventually, and you're not going to have that bourbon craze that there is, or that there has been here the past few years. I think COVID actually kind of helped with that.
it did.
Because I like myself, I liked bourbon prior to COVID, but I got into keeping bottles or building a collection during COVID.
Oh, it kicked us up like 2 or 3 notches easily.
But
cigars and bourbon both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is nothing against what Alan's done prior, but like, we'll say the William Dalton, right? It's a wheated bourbon. There's nothing crazy about it. Is that going to hold on after, this bubble pops?
Right.
It's just to me, I think places are going to have to either do something different or do something crazy to kind of keep a hold of the market after that's done, because there's not going to be that craze or that drive for it.
Yeah.
I'm also
I can see that for sure.
incredibly biased about it too, because that's one of the things that one of the owners of Copper and King said to me when I left was, none of this shit happened on the Indiana side, and no one cares about Indiana bourbon. Well, fuck you. I won a whole bunch of awards off Indiana bourbon, and I've done fine. Now I'm bored with it. Let's move on.
Was that his
Yeah.
real voice?
That was his actual South African accent. Yes.
But I definitely see what you're saying though too. Is like, and maybe I took this wrong, but what you're saying is if you want to be a small craft distillery, regional, do something like craft breweries are. 90% of the craft breweries don't distribute across state lines.
Right.
If you want to be something like that in the distillery space, the problem with that is you're waiting for 4 or 5 years per product. You're not producing beer, putting it in a bottle and selling it today.
Functionality and cost.
So that's where the spirits you can put out a little quicker, like the vodkas and stuff like that. That's why everyone has those. You have to.
Well,
I get it.
I think the trick is the thing that has never been realized with craft distilling yet that was realized with craft brewing. Craft distilling has never been good about leaning into A, its history, and or B, its food shed. Craft brewing was really good about that, especially, having sort of the farmer's market aesthetic that they played off of. Craft distilling has not touched that. Not yet. Maybe in New York a little bit, but nowhere else really, right? So finding those local regional profiles, a 4 or 5 state thing that makes sense, or a certain cultural sort of aesthetic that people come to and that they understand using certain ingredients and doing things other than just vodkas. So like instead of a vodka, looking at something like a Russian style Samagon, which is really in a lot of ways a light white whiskey is what it is. Or looking at things like absinthe. And how do you Americanize absinthe? I mean, everybody and their brother has Americanized gin for the past 200 years.
Yeah. Right.
Nobody Americanized absinthe, right?
Well, I know a guy.
Yeah, right. or looking at, that's one thing I learned at Copper and Kings was what market is well served and what market is served well. And when you find a market that's not well served and it's not served well, there's a gap in the market.
Yeah.
So where's the gap? So the gap could be, this is just one example. The gap could be, and it's a long road to get this on people's mind, but it comes and goes, and every year it gets a little closer. Aquavit. Everyone and their brother has a gin. If you go to a good liquor store, maybe there's two Aquavits total.
Yeah.
Maybe. A whole lot easier to get shelf space. And if you're competing against gin, you just say, it's like gin, but here's what makes it different.
Right.
Here's a canned cocktail that's a Bloody Mary with Aquavit, right? That's one of those gaps in the market.
God, I hope we're getting close to the end of the canned cocktails.
Right? Yeah. I don't know, man. I think it's just going to keep that way.
Well, I think especially if the bourbon bubble pops, like Alan and Justin have kind of said that it will, which I also agree with that, but. Like you said, everybody's been so optimistic.
Right.
Oh, we're just going to plateau and keep everybody.
Yeah.
There's a certain point at where all these craft distilleries are pricing people out. I think about even some of the Indiana distilleries that haven't really changed their product much.
Go ahead and throw them under the bus, Isaiah. It's fine.
I'm not going to
You've
do
been
that.
drinking.
No, I'm not doing that.
Whatever.
But
to?
they haven't really changed their age statement, but maybe
I
between...
normally would.
we normally do.
Okay. So
Took all of 5 seconds for Isaiah. Like, you know what? I'll say
whatever. So
Fine.
I think about distilleries like Starlight. I love them. I've been a supporter of them for a long time.
Sure.
I think they have leaned into the finishing craze a little bit too heavily. They flooded the market. And even in their gift shop, their finished bottles went from $70, which was already on the high end for what I found value to be in those, to now $80, $85.
Yeah.
And you're over there thinking, well, this hasn't even gained a half a year. This is still 4.5 year stuff. Occasionally you'll get a single barrel that's a 5-year before it went into a finishing barrel. So where's the value in that? And there's a lot of craft distilleries. again, I love Starlight. I still drink their stuff. I just had a pour of a Starlight VDN finished bourbon the other night. Do love their stuff. Some of them, I think, aren't going to be caught up, or some of them might be sunk in the bourbon boom because of how they're trying to stretch out now. You said like the local distilleries will stay around and the giants will stay around.
Yeah.
Well, if you're trying to grow past being just something regional or local, I would hate to be caught in the middle at that time when that happens.
Yes. Yeah,
You're
no,
either
that-
going to get
absolutely.
bought or you can get dumped.
Yes.
One of the two.
Or you're gonna lose your ass 100% is
Yeah.
the real problem, right? And then here's the other problem, because everybody who is a business person in this industry thinks that they're a super genius because they think, well, at the very least, if I lose my ass, I've still got all the value in the equipment and all the value in the whiskey. The whiskey's no longer worth anything when there's too much of it out there and you can't market it, and the
Right.
equipment is already not necessarily always the best equipment in the world, and it's
Yeah,
usually
because
wore out.
everybody's got equipment for sale at that
Exactly.
point.
Well, and
Yeah.
your whiskey might be worth something 10, 15 years down the line, like what happened with Stitzel Weller, but you're not going to be around to see that.
No, and you're not going to be the one to get some money from it because
Right.
yeah, exactly. They're going to call in
Getting
all your
pennies
loans,
on the barrel at
etc.
that point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, it's a scary market, and the only other way that I can see that people can pull off such a thing, like if you want to kind of be a mid-level distiller on the smaller side of mid-level, the only other way I see that people can pull that off is by being attached to some sort of tourist attraction, whatever big dumb thing, right, that draws people into your state. If you're attached to that in some way or adjacent to it, then you're probably okay, right?
Which makes sense.
So here is my business proposal.
Should this be
Have you ever
ours?
heard of Uranus Fudge Factory
I have not.
in Anderson, Indiana?
Please don't. Please don't.
Let's attach a distillery on there. Alan said it can grow to mid-size and still be good.
Dude, literally, you walk into the store
So,
and the first
can
thing
we
they
stop?
say is,
Hold on.
"Welcome to Uranus Fudge Factory. How can we help you pack your fudge today?"
So what you're saying is Uranus can grow to mid-size and still be good?
It can.
Okay.
That's exactly
You're
what
okay,
I'm
bud.
saying.
Can we call our new distillery Licks?
Licks.
Licks. Yes.
That'll probably get you in trouble coming from here, though.
Does that mean that just down the road there's a produce stand called Gooch?
There probably should be.
There should
Yes.
be.
Probably
Did you
should
know?
be.
Oh, no shit. There is off subject. In Vincennes, there is a Verizon
Just spit
store
like that, like
called the Gooch.
The gooch.
I shit you not. That was the joke whenever I went to college. It was like, oh, there's the Gooch.
like the Nike,
It was halfway through town.
Yeah.
like the Nike just do it thing. Like
Just
you just
do it.
do just
Just
spit
Gooch
on just spit on it.
Lick the floor.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that
Oh my God.
that might be rough. So
Could be
Anyway,
if you don't spit on it.
could
In other news,
So I did have a question for you too. So, I mean, when you and I sat and talked that first time I met you, you had a lot of like you have a passion for the history in this area.
Mhm.
Is there something we haven't shared yet that you're like, I want to get this out to people so they understand the history behind distilling? I know you talked about the number of distilleries in Southern Indiana. Brandy was like the bomb. But is there something out there that you would like to share?
So I'm currently working on a documentary about Indiana distilling, both historically and in modern days, with a gentleman from IU for PBS.
Okay.
And we think it might have wider distribution than that as well, because we're starting to bring in some other bourbon personalities to talk about Indiana in particular.
That's awesome.
But he has visited a lot of the craft distilleries. He's doing some stuff on MGP. We're going to be taking a trip here shortly where I'm going to take him around to some of the old still sites in southern Indiana and show him where those are at, where people can kind of see what's left, because of those 155, there's only 3 remaining standing buildings of those 155, and then the rest
Yeah.
are all in ruins. Some are in absolutely beautiful areas. And then hopefully be able to interview some people still yet that, might be 1 or 2 generations removed from the distillers who were here back before Prohibition. So that's something that's coming up you guys can look forward to.
Cool.
I do a lot of writing about Indiana's distilling history, or at least I used to at thealchemistcabinet.wordpress.com. I've written a couple of books about sort of kind of autobiographical, and then some of its history, and then some of its like recipes for home distillers. that you can pick up at thealchemistcabinet.com. We're constantly doing new shows about new distilleries. We just started a new Indiana Craft Distillers Guild that we're working on currently. My podcast, Distillers Talk with Christy Atkinson, this fall we're actually going to do an entire Indiana Distillers Guild series, which is like get to know the guild of Indiana distillers.
Oh, awesome.
So
That's awesome.
it'll be Zachary Greedy from the Indiana Distillers Guild who's helping set all this up, and then we're going to try to get through all of the membership of the Indiana Distillers Guild on Distillers Talk, have them on, let them talk about their products and showcase themselves to everyone else. So that's coming along here shortly. There's all kinds of stuff out there that I do. I do a thing called the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute on YouTube. And that's literally trying to encourage home distillers to take the next step and go deeper into their craft and then eventually try to get legal somewhere, right? To encourage those little, small, fleet-footed distilleries to go do weird shit that people will enjoy. So,
Yeah.
if I'm not distilling, I'm probably thinking about it or writing about it or bitching about it or
Well, and I will say one thing. If you guys don't follow Alan on Instagram, it's The Alchemist. Is that what
maybe. I don't remember.
Who's your alchemist?
I follow you on all of them, but one of the things you'll find out when you see him is he'll do some lives. He'll talk about some crazy shit. One of the crazy shits we're going to talk about here in a minute, which is amazing. Yeah. I'm excited about. But one of the things you'll find out about this guy is he has so many different things that he's into. And he's into the occult. He's into all these different things and learning about, what's the name of the podcast? It's if you have ghosts,
you have everything.
You have everything. Yep. That one. And the cool thing is, it seems like you kind of blend everything together because it all kind of works together.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was wondering about you is, like, have you ever went to some of these old distillery sites and did the ghost hunting kind of thing where I know you've done that a little bit with some guests on your show and stuff. Have you ever done any of that to where you can kind of blend the two loves?
Yeah, so to me they're all related anyway. So whether it's agriculture, distillation, music, history,
look at him, he's getting into it already.
All that stuff, that's kind of my crossroads. So I haven't done any straight up just like ghost hunting to ghost hunt at distillery sites, but on If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. That is one thing that is one of our focuses, is trying to have people on who have haunted distilleries. So I have this theory, or this idea, I guess you'd say, that distilled spirits, obviously the name distilled spirits comes from the idea of capturing the quintessence, the essential alchemy of what a thing is.
Yeah.
And distilled spirits are a doorway into another world. They open your mind up in a way that makes you vulnerable. That can help you out or it can hinder you. It's a gift and a curse at the same time. And I have this tendency to believe that the reason there are so many stories related to haunted distilleries, even on new sites, is because whatever spirits, whether they are human or they were never human, understand that there's power in distilled spirits and they connect themselves to those places and therefore to people who imbibe in those spirits because they're a little more vulnerable or a little bit more open to the ability to interact with people that have been affected in a psychological way by drinking distilled spirits, as it were. So that's very much so a part of what I do. When I mentioned the necromancy thing earlier as a joke, one of the characters we have is Maddie Gladden, who was literally a madam who owned a brothel in Salem, Indiana. Again, no one in New Orleans had ever heard her name. Even if they'd been to Salem, Indiana, they never heard her name. If you were in New Orleans and you came into French Lick, you'd have heard Lee Sinclair's name. No one outside of Salem, Indiana knew who Maddie Gladden was until we released that bottle. And now there are people in Texas and New Orleans and Canada and South Carolina and everywhere that know her name. And by telling her story and speaking her story, she still exists. It's a type of immortality. Her quintessence, her spirit is tied directly to that spirit, and therefore she still exists. So for me, all of those things are all greatly interwoven into one another. So
yeah. So speaking of distilleries, another thing that the people, our regulars, wanted to know is who are some of the distilleries that you guys are enjoying or keeping an eye on. These don't have to be craft distilleries. They could be the Big Six in Kentucky or whatever,
they get enough attention.
He said,
Maker's Mark. He's a big Maker's guy.
Maker's 46.
It's called Lushing.
Okay. I want to talk about that in a minute. We'll do that in a minute.
So,
We'll do that.
I love Iron Root Republic. That's one that I absolutely love down in Denison, Texas.
Let's go Texas.
Yeah,
We're big Texas whiskey fans.
Kind of are.
Yeah.
Those
They're doing some magic things down
Yeah.
there.
those guys have caused me to lose a couple of Sundays for sure. But I love what they do. I like Wood Hat Spirits out in Missouri.
Oh yeah, we love Wood Hat. Gary's a great guy.
He's a
Gary's a
fantastic
dude.
guy.
Yeah.
You know, in Indiana, there are several as well that I'm interested in. I think Jason Fruits up at Old 55 does some really interesting things. You know, I think Brian at Hard Truth, I think taking the route towards focusing on rye was a pretty brave one. I also think, of course, you know, the Hubers, there's no taking away what they have contributed to Indiana distillation over the years, for sure. As far as other craft distillers, I'm really interested in. So it's mostly people that are really just pushing the boundaries. Anybody that's doing something weird, but they're doing it really well, I'm very, very interested in. And I'll support anybody that does anything like that, or anybody who has an interesting, legitimate story. One thing I am tired of, like, if I never have to hear the story again of, like, my grandpa was moonshiner and
Oh
had
my
a secret
God.
fucking recipe, go fuck off.
Yeah.
No one wants to hear it. No one cares, right? And part of my story is that, but you guys asked the background. But I've never used that for marketing. I've never used it for product.
But
and I won't
also,
use it.
your grandpa made sugar shine primarily.
There's
We
a
also
distillery
have
that
a
started
little
peeing
thing
into
that we
bliss.
like to talk about too. So there's a little thing that every time you go to a distillery, we're the first one to ever do this.
Yeah.
First one to ever do
And,
that.
This. I'm like, are you really?
I'll throw Jason under the bus on this one. He'll tell you he's the first one to ever do 100% sweet corn whiskey.
It's just not true.
It's just not.
No,
It's not
is-
true.
it's not.
I mean, Gary's doing it in at Wood Hat,
Yeah.
which actually his is fantastic.
Oh,
We
it's
tried it at
great.
just around a year, I think it was.
It was less than a year. It was
Okay.
like 8 or 10 or 11 months, and
Whatever.
it was already delicious. I'm like,
Fantastic.
okay.
Gary
I know
knows how to
Gary
treat
knows
his
what he's doing
grain.
with grains.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bill Hockett over at Dayton Barrel Works as well. He does a sweet corn whiskey. And honestly, if anybody was to get, I wouldn't say it would be the first, but if anybody was going to get the credit for like really pushing the boundary on that, it should be Bill, because Bill is the only person that I've ever seen any evidence whatsoever actually worked as a still hand for Popcorn Sutton. And when I say worked as a still hand, he actually worked directly with Popcorn Sutton.
Huh.
And he based his sweet corn whiskey directly on what Popcorn Sutton was doing. Instead of being dried down sweet corn, it was just straight up sweet corn, cut right off the cob, sour mashed it the old-fashioned way several times over and over again, and went into a new oak barrel, and it's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Bill's also one of the most knowledgeable distillers in the industry out there. And I do love what Jason does as well.
Yeah.
He knows this. I'm not a big fan of the sweet corn whiskey, but I don't think he is either. His wheat bourbon, though, pretty fucking on par. That stuff
Yeah.
is
It
pretty
is good.
impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, it differs crazily, very like barrel to barrel.
Mhm.
But I mean, the other person that's doing it that we got put onto was Whiskey Acres out of Illinois.
I've heard of them, but I've not ever had a chance to try any of their stuff.
I've
They don't
tried-
distribute to Indiana
Not yet.
quite yet, but one of our friends, Eric Jansen, so shout out to him.
We
He's a
do
friend of
shout-outs,
he's a
which
friend of
just
the
allows
shop.
us to drink more.
Yeah.
Right? Fair enough.
He's a friend of the shop. He introduced us to them because he comes from a farming family in Illinois, and really resonates with the brand there. But
And all the stuff I've had from them has been really good.
okay, so we're going to talk about what we're about to drink.
Yes.
And then, Justin, I want to hear from you,
Okay.
like, who your favorite distillers are, who you're drinking right now.
Well,
so
of course, the guy to the right of him is his favorite.
Yeah, it's
Fuck
just-
this guy. Um,
So
But- You fucked
first,
that loose all
let's
the
get
Yeah,
into this.
firstly-
So what are we doing here?
Firstly, what are we drinking? Also,
It's
what did
pretty
you
close.
do to yours?
So let's let Alan describe this.
I think you might went a little too far, but
See,
we'll see.
it looks
could-
a little
it
bit
could
too
be.
clear.
I like
Needs
it.
to be a little more gray.
So what you have here is a sample of, as I said, absinthe is my passion. We were kind of talking about the esoteric and the occult. Absinthe for me is very much so sort of a spiritual pursuit. So this is a true, heavily influenced by the Val d'Etrever's very heavy botanical influenced absinthe. And what I mean by that is Absinthe is the one botanical spirit that can actually trace its ancestry back to botanically influenced wines, going as far back as Salerno, Italy in the 1300s, but specifically into the Val di Travers in Switzerland in the 1600s and 1700s, where you're dealing with almost as much plant material as you are actual alcohol and trying to absolutely extract all the oils from the plant material, not only for the sake of being able to taste those plant materials, but also, and this is not a popular opinion, and I should say first and foremost that I'm not representing Spirits of French Lick when I say this, for medicinal reasons. There should be a category of alcohol, whether people like it or not, and whether or not the U.S. government likes it or not, that's called functional alcohol. And I don't mean functional alcoholic. I mean alcohol that actually has physiological effects that are for the positive, such as for digestion, etc., anxiety. Absinthe is one of the very few spirits that actually has that. As a matter of fact, when you smell absinthe, it activates the part of your brain that recognizes food, not the part that recognizes alcohol. Most of the botanicals that are in absinthe, such as grand wormwood, fennel, anise, even basil, a little bit of licorice root, etc., they all help settle the stomach. They all help with gastrointestinal problems, etc. Wormwood is literally called wormwood because it can get rid of worms, and that's what it was used for many, many, many years. And it's one of those things that has a mystery around it, a mystique around it for all the wrong reasons. There's all these ideas that absinthe will make you hallucinate. There's all the romanticism that comes with it. You know, most people, their first experience with anything to do with absinthe is either watching like Bram Stoker's Dracula and seeing it on there, or seeing it in Nine Inch Nails' The Perfect Drug video. This idea of hallucinations, etc., that was never the case with absinthe. It was made illegal because of that, but specifically because the wine industry wanted to get rid of it in order to
which
replace
there are regulations on it now with how much wormwood and stuff you can get in it, aren't there?
So there are, it turns out, then Ted Bro was the one who was responsible for figuring this out from Jade Absinthe, also another distiller that I absolutely adore. And Ted does wonderful recreations of Victorian era absinthes from France in particular. But they had outlawed it and banned it in many countries in the world because they thought it was a hallucinogen. And specifically, they thought that alpha-thujone, which is a component of grand wormwood, was a hallucinogen. It isn't. You're going to find more alpha-thujone in a little vial of sage oil than you'll find in any pre-prohibition or pre-ban bottle of absinthe. It can be, what is the word I'm looking for? It can cause spasms and things of that nature in high dosages, but you're talking you die of alcohol poisoning before you ever got to that point.
Totally.
So there is a sort of arbitrary amount of alpha-thujone that the FDA recognizes as safe, and subsequently the TTB sort of controls as being safe, but it really has nothing to do with safety, and I'm hoping to see that changed because we're about 20% below what they actually allow in the European Union, unfortunately. So it's very hard to make a true, real American absinthe that's legal at this point.
So here's what I think is weird about that. So the European Union is always big on safety of food, safety of drink, allowing certain things, not allowing certain things, but that we can use more wormwood there. Whereas in the United States, it's like, fuck the food, fuck the drink, who cares?
And I suspect it's because they have a longer history with those particular plants in Europe than what we have here.
But you also think, like, one of the things that's taught in high school history classes is the Salem witch trials.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that starts with giving absinthe a bad name.
It does, and there's an association between absinthe and what you would have thought of as like a granny witch or someone who is a folk healer, etc. There definitely, that association is certainly there. You also have to understand that absinthe originates at a time in the Swiss Alps in particular, where the Swiss Alps for a long time was the last real democratic stronghold in Europe. Where women still had rights. And then once the Catholic Church moves in, those rights start to disappear. And so, for example, if you were a distillator, liquorist, I probably didn't say that right, but a female distiller in particular, and you had a method for manufacturing absinthe or whatever else that you were making, they literally made it illegal unless you had a pharmacy license in order to sell or market or make that stuff. And you couldn't have a pharmacy license unless you were a male. So they immediately pushed a lot of these women off to the fringes and made them no longer a part of the story. And so I think there is a certain witchiness, as it were, around absinthe for sure. Now, the other thing, even though it's not a hallucinogen, one thing I will tell you about it, other than it being a functional medicine in a lot of ways, is that this, of all of the spirituous drinks that are out there, has more to do with alchemy than anything else does. This much more resembles what alchemists were doing. The idea of the philosopher's stone, the idea of personal transformation, the idea of having to pay attention and put intent into what you're doing in life. This is exactly what absinthe is. And so my passion really is, Ted Bro from Jade is already making great Parisian style absinthes. I don't need to do that. I don't necessarily need to make a Verde absinthe, although I do sometimes make a Verde absinthe. I'm much more interested in how do you Americanize absinthe, but you keep it legitimate to the traditions of the Val de Travers. So I've done that by using different colorants over the years and different ingredients that are very Americanized. Sometimes I'll use things like honeysuckle, or, for example, I make a yellow-orange absinthe, which is we're using marigold petals for that. I make a purple absinthe where I'm using a purple corn. This was a go at what was originally going to be a dark purple, and this was darker the other day because they're not always completely stable. But this is what I'm calling a black absinthe.
Yeah.
I won't tell you how it was colored. I will tell you that it does affect the aroma as well as the taste as well.
I agree.
There are about 14 botanicals in here, and this was literally as many solids, if not more, than there were liquid in the still. So you're talking for 1 gallon of base alcohol that you're macerating, you're talking 120 grams of grand wormwood, you're talking 250 grams of fennel, 250 grams of anise. Some of the heavier components might have been things like a little bit of licorice root, maybe around 10 to 15 grams of licorice root. There's a little bit of basil in there. There's lemon balm at about 20 grams per gallon. You're literally...
Did you do black pepper?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
It's...
I don't get the black pepper. But
It's
I get all
fantastic.
those. Oh,
So there is a savory note when this is neat.
Yeah.
And now, to be honest with you, this is 140 proof as it is without loosening it
Jeez.
down.
God bless you.
Yeah.
So
It's fantastic.
You'll
Oh, I
notice
love it.
there's a floral note on the nose. That's the wormwood. And that was wormwood that I grew in my backyard that was harvested 3 years ago that we aged for 3 years.
Again, back to rednecks in southern Indiana.
Yes.
He's growing wormwood in his back freaking yard.
He's not only
It's
growing
amazing.
wormwood. I've been there, and there's a forest
Yeah.
of wormwood.
Well, last time I was here, it was your birthday, and you were going home to do a little mushroom hunting.
Yep.
Man, that has been a little
Like,
bit.
hell yeah,
I didn't
baby,
realize
let's
that was
go.
how long.
So
Sorry.
one thing
you're good.
that I'm not big on, so like the Victorian era stuff, the Belle Epoque stuff, and again, Jade Liqueurs is great at that. So they tend to go like this super heavy anise, very sweet, very cloying, very dessert-like.
Yeah.
I tend to go more herbal. I want some of that bitter compound to come to the forefront. And I think that
Sure.
bitter compound is definitely here. It's a little savory, like a little even, I think in terms of like culinary devices, like something like Worcestershire sauce, like a little of that savory comes to the forefront, a little bitterness comes to the forefront, maybe even a little of that saline sort of characteristic comes to the forefront. But that anise is still there. It's just not straight black licorice though, because there's so
Yeah.
many modifying elements. Now, your black pepper comment.
Yeah.
So actually, cinnamon. There's a little bit of cinnamon in this.
Okay.
A little bit of vanilla. in
That makes
this.
sense.
So
It's kind of funny too because I have a lot of people I'm trying to introduce to absinthe because I love absinthe, and when I'm in the bar, everybody's had Jaeger.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody's had Jaeger. So what I do is I take your absinthe little blue and do 1 part that, 1 part Fernet. I'm
Yeah.
like, this is what Jägermeister should have been.
It's what it wishes it was. Yeah.
And it's like everyone tastes it like, oh, I get it. Oh, I get it. And it's like it doesn't take long before I realize.
I've got Fernet
It's
at
good.
home now. I'm doing this.
You
When-
should.
Oh,
You
the
should.
absolute
It's
little
great.
blue and that one,
So
one
to
part
one?
to one, just a little
Yeah.
small little drink and sip it. It's what Jaeger should
Well,
have
shoot
been.
it. It'll
Sure.
calm your stomach too.
It will.
Yeah. After
makes
you
you
have
feel better.
after you have a big meal.
Okay, so real quick, what he did with his, explain that process for us, Alan.
Yeah. So that's what's called the louche or the lelouch.
Louche,
So
okay.
that's the I hesitate to use the word proper, but that's a traditional way to drink absinthe. And sometimes it's done with sugar, sometimes it isn't. But typically,
Okay.
ice cold water, added to absinthe at a rate of about 1 part absinthe to maybe 3 parts water. And what happens is all the essential oils fall out of suspension and you drop the proof. So you end up drinking your absinthe at around 14% alcohol, basically. And then the proper way to luge is what Justin is trying to do here is to catch to where you have, to me, at least just a little line of alcohol that floats right on top.
Oh, shook it up.
If you watch, I don't know if your camera will be able to see this or not, but you can watch it cloud.
See right there. Right there?
Yeah.
And usually you do this very slow.
You might be, yeah.
Yeah, it's commonly done with a dripper.
Yes. And a lot of times over top of a
I
sugar
should have been
cube.
patient. What you're saying.
Although I don't typically drink mine with a sugar cube because I don't find that it needs it.
I don't like sugar cubes on them either.
I do have a question. So,
There, you can see it's starting to really.
oh, there it is.
Oh, there it
Yeah,
is.
I did mine way too
Damn,
fast.
I
Yeah, that's a
I
really
wish I'd gone
distinct
that way.
line
Yeah,
in there.
it's a hell of a luge.
All right, I'm
So you say cinnamon
I need to find a place to dump this.
with no
You can
heat.
just do it right on the ground, brother.
No, I'll find it.
Throw it on a barrel.
No, I'm gonna find it.
Look how heavy.
There's no drain in here. Just dump it. It's all right.
I'm not doing that.
Drink it, Rob.
What you're looking for is kind of an opalescence.
Sorry.
So with that cinnamon.
So did I not go far enough with mine?
No, I don't believe
Okay.
so.
So cinnamon can sometimes get a little muddy.
I'll
Yep,
drink it on
right.
the way home.
This guy throws it in a
This
a
dude-
water bottle. He's like, I'll
This
have it
dude's
later.
worked out.
All right, I want to do it the right
I
way.
get that cinnamon thing, and I know you're not saying what you're using to darken it as. We're going to talk later.
So I
because
still need
have
to go
my-
further until it's that purple color?
What? I don't know if maybe you didn't have enough in there, and maybe you
Oh,
moved
okay.
it too far.
Could be.
Well, this is too far.
Yeah.
His is green. I don't know why.
Well, if you guys
Mine
dump
is
yours,
separate.
I was first
that where
pour
we need
off
to
of
be?
it. Maybe
Where
we
the
should have
separation
shook
is?
it.
a little more, about like this right here.
Okay.
And you can see there's still a line of alcohol left on top here. Now, most people will go ahead and go further than that, but I tend to like mine at a little higher proof. So
Yeah.
About
There
there.
you go a little bit more.
One more.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want that alcohol line at top to be just.
if you want to throw yours, I'll give you a little drink of this one. That way you get an idea of what it really is.
Why
supposed
did you do that to that
Like
barrel?
It's good for
Is
it.
that what we're talking?
Getting closer.
Getting
See?
close.
A little more.
You want the line to be gone.
Almost.
Almost, yeah, just like right at the brink of.
Keep going.
Eh.
Yep, keep
Yeah,
going.
I really just
Go
nailed
for it.
that
Keep
barrel
going.
with absinthe.
That's all good. It ain't gonna hurt nothing.
Be all right.
Let me give you a little more. I'll leave that whole glass.
Smidge more.
There you go.
I just a scotch.
Just a skosh.
Yep.
That's
So-
a skosh.
And the other day, this wasn't
I would
a
call
darker
that good.
color.
Alright,
It was
good.
more of a charcoal color.
Yeah.
But that's the thing with absinthe coloration because you're doing it naturally with plants. They're not always completely stable.
I was just say the other day, it was black.
Yeah.
So, Justin,
Yes.
let's hear your top distilleries right now, or what you're drinking apart from the stuff that you contribute in making.
One of the distilleries that I will always follow.
Jeff the Creed.
No. I will fight a motherfucker if they hand me a glass of Jeff
We're
the
with
Creed.
you, buddy.
Oh
It's
my
fine.
gosh, Moldy Corn City, man.
Moldy Corn City, yeah.
Ugh.
No, MB Roland is going to be one that I will
Okay,
always
MB
follow.
Roland,
If
okay.
you have you ever had MB Roland?
I have not.
The
No.
only way I can describe pretty much every bourbon or whiskey that they put
I had
out
one of their
is
smoky ones.
now the smoky one is different. It's called dark fired.
Yeah.
They smoke their corn. If you like smoke, you will like it. If you don't like smoke, you will absolutely fucking hate it because
Gotcha.
It's like Lay's barbecue chip smoke.
yeah, like so you know
It's not peat smoke.
you know the bark on the outside of a pork loin when you smoke
Yeah.
it? It's like that times 10. It's smoke. But
Yeah,
like
I'm not sure.
their other stuff that they do, the rye and the bourbon, to me they have one of the most unique flavor profiles out there as far as craft distilling because I don't know if you have all have ever chewed tobacco before.
Oh.
So Levi Garrett or Red Man,
Mhm.
that sweet molassesy note
Mhm.
is there with what they're doing. Now I will say they've recently went from 15s to 53s. I think they were doing something like more 15s in the beginning, some 53s, and then throughout the process moving to more 53s. I think they're losing a lot of that when they're going to 53s. I wish they would have just stayed with 15s, in all honesty. But they have one of the most unique flavor profiles that I'll throw out there. I've kind of followed them for a little while, even before I got into distilling and things like that. Other than that, and I can't remember the name of it, but there's a Balcones bottle that I've got at home that I'm savoring just because it's like mesquite smoky, which is really, really interesting.
We just got a bottle of that.
We did.
Well,
it was
not
peated.
mesquite,
It
it's
was
peated.
legitimately peated.
Yeah.
What we got.
There's one of those. I don't have anything botanical at home that I'm kind of savoring. I'm thanks to Alan, I'm kind of getting into some of the botanical stuff as far as just weird, funky, and grungy things. Shit. That's really about it. In all honesty, I will put it out there out front. Like, I don't drink as much now as I used to. Like, getting into this, I've actually slowed down a little bit. I don't know why, but it's part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, those couple there are the ones that I will either chase or always go back to. They're like the backbone of what I like flavor profile wise.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah,
'cause I think
know
Alan's
Alan
got
needs
to
to
get out of here.
soon, so.
Oh, it's all good. I appreciate you guys coming and doing this.
No, this is great.
I'm gonna get you some more of that absinthe. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
I think you can have fun pairing that with cigar too, because I think there's enough savory and mouthfeel there. There'd be something cool.
I agree. And honestly, if the water was a little colder, I think it would have actually popped.
It usually does when the water's cold. That's a very particular
I
part.
want
of
to
it.
make a Sazerac with that and that.
Yeah,
Just
it'd be
because.
fun.
I mean, I could probably do that.
Well,
And by probably do that, I'll probably do that when we get the bottles when we first get them delivered.
yeah.
Apple Saz.
Apple Saz.
Ooh,
I like
that could
it.
be good.
So, you can find me on Instagram at the Whiskey Pastor. Alan, you want to shout out your Instagram,
And
also
your
your other
podcast.
podcasts.
I'll just do my normal thing because I don't remember any of my social media. So you can find me at thealchemistcabinet.com. You can find me at the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute on YouTube. You can find me at Distillers Talk Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. And you can find, if you have ghosts, you have everything, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, and if you don't catch those right out of the way, Isaiah, I'm going to ask you to add those to the show notes at
Right.
the bottom of the
Yeah.
podcast.
If I remember.
Try.
Get it done.
Try hard.
452 links later.
Perfect. And how about you, bud?
So you can find me on Facebook, Justin Whaley. You can also find me on the Still Learning podcast. If I ever put out another episode, yes, fuck you, Alan. I know you're going to say that.
Are you done yet?
Fuck you. Yeah, Still Learning podcast and Justin Whaley on Facebook.
Yeah, and you can follow us on Instagram at Final Third Cigar. Thanks a lot, guys. We really appreciate you guys coming out.
Absolutely.
Good seeing you guys again,
Absolutely,
as
man.
always.
man.
I feel like we are kindred spirits on a lot of the stuff we love, and we're excited to have your product in there and hopefully do more in the future. So,
I'm looking forward to it, man.
yeah, thanks a lot, guys, and we will see you all next week. Cheers.
Cheers.